All righty. Well, thank you all for joining. Some will keep hopping in, and we will record this too so that people can listen to it in the car, podcast format, however they need to. Um, I say we jump right in. Will our four panel members go ahead and introduce themselves? Tell us what you do, where you went to law school, how you got there.
Well,
Sure.
I'll start.
Oh,
My name is Jennifer Smith. I am an attorney at for the University of Arkansas System. I'm assigned to UAMS Medical Center. Prior to that, I was a partner at Wright Lindsay and Jennings. I was actually a nurse for 10 years before I decided to go to law school, and I always knew I wanted to practice health law, and that's what I've done my entire career.
all right. I'm Andrea Kleinhens, and I'm an associate at Wright Lindsay and Jennings. I've been there for 3 years now. I went to law school as a non-traditional student as well and worked with Jennifer, had the privilege of also doing some health law. Before law school, I owned a small business on the Fayetteville Square. Um, and always thought that I wanted to go to law school. And out of undergrad, my uncle, who's an attorney, he said, I don't think you really want to go to law school. You should work for a law firm for a year and see if that's what you want to do. And so I worked for a for a law firm for a year out of undergrad and thought, this is not at all what I want to do. And so I took my time to finally come to the realization that no, this is what I want to do. I think I'm going to go to law school. And I went to the U of A in Fayetteville.
Mark, go ahead.
Okay, Jared, I'm Mark Hagemeyer. I bet, the oldest person of the panelists, heading into kind of the twilight of my career. I came to law. I took about a 10-year hiatus out of college and came back as a non-traditional student. I then had a career that bounced from various things, but public service was sort of the thread that kept it all together. I went from the federal courthouse to state attorney general to the University of Arkansas. Over time, I now lead the group of lawyers in the compliance office at UAMS in Little Rock. Um, it's been a great gig over time, and it's been a very, very, very interesting learning path for me. So, Jared, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thanks. My name is Jared Medlock. I have a firm in Fort Smith. We have a second location in Van Buren, but so I went the traditional route, went to undergrad at the University of Fayetteville, went to law school, and then directly started working. The day after I took the bar, I started a private practice here and have been in a couple of different private practices with starting my own now. Gosh, it's been 15 years ago, I guess, maybe 16 years ago, that I've had my own firm with kind of comings and goings of associates. But I've been exclusively in private practice, primarily at this point, that is injury related work and criminal work. We've done everything through the years, but now with some associates, primarily what I'm doing is injury work and criminal stuff.
Awesome. Well, kind of going off of all that, I'm curious to hear all y'all's thoughts on, do you have any tips on narrowing down the specialty of law do you want to get into? If so, how soon do you recommend students figure out what area of law they want to be in college? Should they keep their options open for as long as possible? Should they start gearing their classes and resume around that now? What are y'all's thoughts?
So I'll start with that. Me being a non-traditional student and also knowing what I want to do in health law, you may want to take what I have to say with a grain of salt. But I had no idea what law school would be like. I wasn't even sure they would accept a nurse in law school. So it was almost like a dare that I even applied to law school. But what I learned is to give yourself the opportunity to kind of explore different areas of law. I would not recommend you kind of lock yourself in from the very beginning, just because there are so many different things you can do with a law degree. And if you don't really have any prior experience with the law, you might learn that you're really interested in something that you had no idea from the beginning that you would be interested in. For me, I was really interested in criminal law. I thought that was fascinating. I also feel like it's a great public service to do criminal law work. Really wasn't my career path, but it was very interesting to me during law school. But I don't know that I would want to lock in, especially the first year, maybe at the end of the second year after you've got a broader idea of different areas of law. But also because there are so many things you can do with a law degree that you're not really going to be able to experience in law school. I would keep your options open and try to identify what am I good at? What kind of things do I like to do? Because I think of law as a service profession. I'm serving my client. And part of kind of figuring out what you want to do might be determining who do you want your client to be. I'll turn that over to the next panelists.
I would say take advantage of your externships and your summer internships to figure out where you want to be. Because I started law school and immediately in my mind, I said, I'm never going to do anything criminal. I don't want anything to do with criminal law. And then lo and behold, those were my absolute best and favorite classes. They were the most fascinating. They were the most exciting cases to learn about. And so I kind of let myself explore through externships working for Judge Karen up in Benton County and then the USAO to figure out, do I really not want to do criminal law, or is it that it's that's just not how my mind doesn't work that way. And through externships I did figure out that criminal law wasn't really my path. But if I had just gone with my initial assessment of I don't want to do that, I could have lost out on very valuable experiences in my externships.
And I would say I've had a super varied path. I worked 5 years for the federal court system in Little Rock. Then I went into private practice. I found out within a very short time that really wasn't what turned my crank. I went to work for the Attorney General's office. I worked for the Arkansas Municipal League. I came back to the AG, ultimately found my way to the University of Arkansas. So mine was definitely, I learned over time that I liked public service. But there are lots of different paths out there. And just because you necessarily commit to one path doesn't mean that over time you can't switch to another path. I've told this story a lot to law students over the years. If you go to law school, I find two general types of people in law school. They're either people who want to do business and make some money. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. There's also a group that want to make the world a better place. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you cross those two, if you find yourself, if you're one of the people who want to make the world a better place, save the whales, prosecute criminals, make sure criminals have good defense lawyers, whatever that may be, but you wind up number one in your class and you go to work for like a large insurance defense firm and you're billing your life away, when you're like, I'm not doing what satisfies my soul, you need to make a change or you'll just go crazy, right? And in the same way, if you're one of these people who's like, I want to have a business, I want to be a sharp person in town, I want to be known, and you don't maybe make law review, that doesn't mean that you can't ultimately have a business and do all those things later on in your life. And so don't confuse at the end what your core is and who you are and take a job that's not going to satisfy what nurtures you and what brought you to law school in the first place.
So I would say I've taken the business route. I mean, owning the firm and doing that, and didn't make law review and wasn't number one in my class. So it's possible. So I would echo Andrea's thoughts, though, as far as trying to find what you like. Take advantage of every clinic there is, any opportunity that you have to take a clinic class. It work for free if you have to for some law firms around town. Just even if it's 8 or 10 hours a week, I promise every law firm will take a pre-law clerk and just see what what it is. My dad is a lawyer, and so when I went to law school, I thought I wanted to be a prosecutor. That's what he was doing at the time, and he ran for judge and has subsequently been elected. And now in private practice, I would never see myself, as either a prosecutor or sitting on the bench. So obviously, as you get older, the path changes, but I think it narrows as well with not only, Mark, in your circumstance where you've had multiple opportunities to figure out what's right for you, but my advice for a 1L or somebody in law school now is take advantage of every one of those opportunities outside the law school, not just the class, but the clinics and the internships and the externships, like Andrea said. That's the best way you're going to actually find out what it's about, because it's a lot different than in most places than what you're going to learn actually in the classroom.
Well, and while we're talking about, places to find experience in Arkansas and how it's different from inside and outside the classroom, do you guys feel that Arkansas is a unique place to practice law in any way? Is there states you ever wish that you were practicing law in otherwise? What are your thoughts on that?
So I'm only licensed in Arkansas, and not having practiced in other states, I don't know that there's anything unique in Arkansas. I do think we might be unique in the fact that I feel like we have a small legal community, and it's a lot of lawyers know a lot of other lawyers. So it's not this huge, there's not tens of thousands of attorneys in the state of Arkansas. So I think that it kind of lends itself to community, and you can develop good relationships with other attorneys throughout the state. Even when you find yourself adverse to them, you might be adverse in court, but then you can go out and have dinner later and you have a very collegial relationship. I don't know if that's unique to Arkansas, but I think that's a really great thing about Arkansas. Because I do health law, and we deal with a lot of federal regulations and a lot of things on a national level. I am a member of some national groups. The American Health Law Association is the main one, and that gives me an opportunity to kind of develop relationships with people in other states that do similar work that I do. And I think that is a huge benefit, but I don't know that other states have the kind of collegial, almost small town experience of that we have in Arkansas, because it is a smaller legal community.
I would agree with Jennifer's assessment that it is a very small bar. I know they'll tell you this, especially as you take your upper level classes, is the law school will tell you these stories about, don't burn bridges, don't be that person that they tell horror stories about at the bar association meetings, because it's true. They do remember you. They see you in court. They see how you interact, not just in court, but over emails, any kind of situation where you're interacting, even if you're adverse, it's always respectful, because these are your peers. These are the people that you see, and the bar doesn't get much bigger. It's just a small state. And I did live in Oregon. I'm not barred there, but I lived in Oregon out of undergrad, and I wouldn't say there's anything particularly unique about practicing in Arkansas. There is definitely a hometown feel when you go to some of the smaller counties. I had a probate matter out in Flippin, Arkansas, in Yellville, and I got hometown. I work at one of the biggest firms in Arkansas, and it doesn't matter that I work for a big firm. It's actually kind of in your detriment when you're working with people who they know these judges so well. They are friends. They go to church together. It's just a really small community. So be prepared for that. Even if you're right on the law, even if the law says you are correct, a judge may just decide, yeah, but this is my buddy. We're going to do this. And you just have to work around it, be prepared for it.
Yeah, I would say that because we're a small state, I think a lot of small states have collegial bars like I have folks that practice in Iowa and Nebraska and New Mexico, and I think that they have a similar feel to their bar. A lot of people, um, I think, I think you can have an oversized impact if you serve in a small state. People kind of flee small places to bigger places, and then you're lost in Dallas or Houston or Nashville or whatever. And if you stay in Arkansas, I would contend, I look at Jared, he can have an oversized impact in a place like Fort Smith if serve your church, you serve your community, you serve on a couple of nonprofit boards. People really are, maybe desperate is too strong of a term, but they really need the kind of training that lawyers provide. Shakespeare said, kill all the lawyers. That wasn't because he just hated lawyers. That was because they provide a leavening to the bread that other professions don't. And because of your training, you can have really quite an oversized impact in a small place like Arkansas.
So I kind of have an interesting experience. I only have a license to practice in Arkansas, but I've had some cases in Texas, Tennessee, Missouri, Illinois, a couple of cases in St. Louis. And what I would say is there's definitely a collegial and communal feel in Arkansas. But then I would go even further to say that that actually is region to region. So the way that people practice law in Northwest Arkansas, Bentonville, and Fayetteville compared to how law is practiced in Fort Smith is drastically different. And just like Andrea's experience in Yellville, when you go to some of these small counties, Logan County here down the road from me, and you get down into Mena and you go to Waldron, it's very different than it is in Bentonville. When I go to Fayetteville or Bentonville, every decision in every case for lawyers is like the only decision. Every single part of every single case is a full-on battle, and it's full to the death. And Fort Smith is not that way. I mean, it's every lawyer knows everybody, and it's much more big picture there. And Little Rock has that same feel. My experience in Little Rock, a lot of lawyers there are very contentious about everything. So I don't know if that is because of the size of the bar in those two and the competition, and I don't know what causes that, but I would say that even within the state, there are kind of places where the law is different. But generally speaking, I do think it's communal. I mean, these cases where I've been out of state, I had that experience of being, nobody knew who I was and walking in, and you're not greeted by anyone from the bar. When you walk into the courtroom, there's no lawyer that comes up, shakes your hand, and says, "Hey, who are you and what are you doing here?" And I make it a point to do that when somebody comes into one of the courthouses that I'm in all the time, just because it's a little smaller. So I would kind of echo everyone's thoughts that Arkansas is much more collegial and communal than some of the other states around. But again, from a private practice standpoint and a litigation standpoint, know that within Arkansas, there's definitely these pockets of very contentious litigation. If that's what you want to do, I mean, that's certainly available. Not a path that I wanted to do. So Fort Smith is perfect for me. But yeah, my 2 cents on it.
Hey, Kenneth, I would chime in. Do not ever underrate an Arkansas lawyer. On Jared's point, I've seen lawyers come to Arkansas federal court from Washington, D.C., California, Texas, and they thought, oh, we're just going to mop these little local people up. I mean, there are some awesome, awesome locally trained lawyers, and you better never underestimate them, or they will smoke you in a heartbeat. Thank you.
I'm sure my many feisty co-students will be happy to attest to that in the future. Well, and it's cool and refreshing to hear too, because I know a lot of the big debates right now going on with 1L students is, do I stay to practice in Arkansas? Do I go elsewhere? I think it's cool and refreshing to hear that you'll get both the neighborly feel in Arkansas, and there is the kind of harder, grittier, more contentious legal work if you're looking for it. So there's a good mix. I want to bring it back to law school just a little bit. This is a question that we've all heard a ton of people say on panels the past month, but what is something that you guys wish you knew going into law school? Whether it's how to practice exams, classes you wish you would have took or taken earlier. If you had one or two big pieces of advice to give to fresh 1L students, what would that be?
Wish I had known.
Sorry, Jennifer, go ahead.
Oh, well, how different law school was going to be to any other type of school I had been in. I did not know. I didn't have any lawyers in my family. I didn't know any lawyers. So I was not prepared for you walk in and you have a full semester of classes and one final that your grade is going to be based on. So that for me was very intimidating. But even after learning that, I wish I had known at the beginning that's not really that big a deal. You're still going to be okay. You're still going to pass your class. It's still going to be fine, even if you only have one way to measure the test. It's not like traditional school where you go in and you have to memorize a whole bunch of facts. It's really all about how you analyze and apply the law to a certain fact situation.
I would say the thing that I knew in my mind going into law school, but I didn't really put into practice as much as I should have was keep track of the people outside of your law school circle. Don't lose your friendships, don't lose your relationships, don't lose your hobbies or what you love to do outside of law school because it can feel really all consuming, especially your 1L year. It can feel like you're in the trenches and you can't see outside of it. But don't cancel dinners. Go make the time to check in with your friends because there will be a time once you're out of law school and you don't want the people that were important in your life to be like strangers. They aren't in there with you and they can't fully understand the pressures that can feel so heavy. But don't miss calls, miss texts, skip out on birthday parties, do those things and keep a part of yourself separate from law school with your hobbies, whatever you like to do, keep that going the whole time.
I would riff on Andrea's the habits that you start to form even right now in your 1L year will start to be the habits that you carry over I think into practice. And so two habits that I swore that I was when I started law school at 28, I was going to one, stay married to the same woman that I came to law school with, and two, I was going to be the healthiest law student in my class. And I managed to A, stay married to the same woman all the way through law school, plus another 30 years. And two, I don't know if you still read Pennoyer versus Neff. That's this dumb torts case. I can't remember what the stupid point of the case was. And like 4 o'clock one afternoon, we're up in the library and I've read this dumb thing in rem, in personam, whatever. And I just shut my book. I was the first person to shut my book. I stood up and like 20 people around me, it was this intake of air. And they said, well, what are you going to go do? I said, man, I'm going to go swimming because I'm never going to understand this. I have no idea what's going on here. But you know what? I'm going to go down to the pool and I'm going to crank some meters out. So you are still going to live. You're still going to be fine. You're going to eat in the future. Don't let it flip you out.
It's funny, Mark, I wrote down one thing that said exercise, just because from a mental health perspective, you'll need it. But the other thing, I think when I kind of figured out in law school where I wanted to go, that I wanted to go to and practice in litigation, I was kind of past the point of those procedural classes. So my advice, just from a practical standpoint, is if you think you want to go to court and you think you want to do that, pay attention to the evidence and the Civ Pro and the Crim Pro stuff. It was, my first year and a half, and those were all overwhelming at the time. And then you figure out that, those things are going to be a part of your daily practice if you're in practice every day. So just from a practical standpoint, I would say that. But I did write down in response to the question, exercise. So I always felt that for me, when I finally figured out that when I exercise, everything else was better. That kind of made the whole process easier, and just that time away is good. I don't really have any non-lawyer friends anymore, Andrea, so I can't identify with that. I did not follow that advice. I have one childhood friend that I still communicate with because my first year of law school became all consuming. So that's a great piece of advice if you guys can follow it.
So, I mean, I know we talked about the stress of class, a little bit of getting up and leaving. Even Jared was mentioning Civ Pro a little bit there. Do you guys have any classes that were your favorites that you look back now? And I know, I think Andrew was the one who mentioned earlier that she didn't think she had any interest in criminal law and it became one of her favorites. But looking back now, what are the classes that we should look forward to? And was it the professor that defined that, or was it the content?
Interestingly for me, my health law class was the one I disliked the most. I felt like I just didn't really get anything out of it. I really liked my criminal law class and criminal procedure class, which was frankly surprising. I think the one that was probably the most beneficial was research. And I'll tell you, when my first year of law school, every professor said, this is your most important class. Every professor will tell you this, but this is really true. And for me, it was the research and the writing classes, but I think I rely more on the research class than the others in my day-to-day life.
That is a really hard question because I'm a school nerd. Like if I could be a professional student and just go to school all the time, I would. I loved the criminal procedure 1 and 2, mainly because it's just tell me how this sausage is made. I want to know, if a police pulls you over, how can they get evidence? And then evidence class, how do you get that in? Can you keep it out? Those classes were probably my favorite. It had a lot to do with the professors. I had Professor Galini and Professor Nunn, both of whom are no longer at the U of A, but they're the kind of professors that it's and you'll find them even without these particular professors, the ones that they'll look at you and say, do you get it? And they'll know if you're lying. They're like, if you don't get it, let's talk it through. We're gonna get it. This is gonna click for you. And it seems like all of my favorite classes, that was the professor wasn't just reading from a script. They want you to get it. And if the fact pattern is a little bit different on the bar or a little bit different on the exam, can you get what the concept is and apply it? And those are the great classes.
Yeah, I can say I didn't take a single class in law school that I now utilize in my job. I didn't take employment law. I didn't take medical law. I didn't take any of those. I took decedents estates, just kind of the standard classes. The ones I found most interesting were the criminal procedure classes, criminal law classes, just because the fact situations are fantastic and you're like, this is nuts. And they just keep your attention. And so, nothing is more dull than a force majeure clause in a contract case. Like, what is the point of this exactly? And so, I certainly toward the last 3 semesters, look at things to just say, hey, I'd like to just try a wide variety of things. Again, it's sort of like your internships and externships. Maybe you're going to read some law that you're like, oh, this just actually is interesting to me. That'd be my advice.
Yeah, so for me, it's probably a professor more than a class. There was a professor there named Dick Atkinson for a period of time that was my property professor, and then he ended up teaching. They did Barbary Live back then, and so anyway, he taught the Barbary class, but that's probably the most interesting class that I had. But as Yeah, to be honest, I didn't really like any of them. I mean, just I'm going to be real honest. But looking back at the time, now looking back, I obviously wish I had paid more attention to certain things, just because, as I say, I mean, now you look up and go, oh well, I wish I didn't have to, when I relearn the rules of evidence, I'd paid a little more attention. But I think it's for me, it was more professors that were interesting to me, or that, some of them you can tell that they don't really care if you get it, and the ones that do, I think, are the ones that always drew me in. But Dick Atkinson always is, that's always a fond memory, just because he actually made an impression upon all of us, I feel like, in my group.
Wonderful. And one more topic on terms of like your 1L law school year. If you were looking back now and there's one thing that you wish you would have put on a resume, or something that would impress you today on a resume for a 1L student, other than grades being the obvious one, what would that be? I know a lot of us right now are thinking, should we add student organizations? Should we become a notary public? Like, what are the things that we can add to a resume that would really make a 1L student stand out? And if you guys had any that you did, how did that benefit you?
So for me, I would like to see more about you as an individual. What kind of volunteer services have you done? What organizations are you involved in? I am less interested in your GPA than kind of you as a person and kind of your outlook on the world. So uh, other than that, I'm not really sure. I think it's going to be depend on the position that you have open and what you're looking for. But I think just overall, if I'm looking for something particular, I want to see who you are in that resume.
I would agree. As a non-traditional student, I had a very different resume than a lot of people straight out of law school. And that's kind of what landed me my job. Was they saw my resume, and I was not top of my class. I had two children when I started law school. My youngest was 2 years old the day I started law school. And they were really interested in my resume about what I did before. And it didn't matter if it was camp counselor, because I cooked at a ranch in Colorado. I was a cook. They were like, tell me about, what is this? Tell me about this. How long were you in Colorado? And my entire interview was talking about the weird stuff on my resume. It wasn't my GPA, and I didn't do law review. I couldn't, because I owned a business and had two small children. Um, but they wanted to know, what are my hobbies? And I said, oh, well, I love to cook. I bake all the time. They're like, oh, really? What do you bake? And are you going to bring us anything? And that sort of thing. The personal stuff is really what's going to make you stand out, because everybody's going to put that they had an internship, that they have this GPA, here's the law review article that I wrote. And that's awesome. That should be on your resume. Do not leave that out. But also, if you like singing opera, put that on there. It's the random stuff about you that will make someone want to extend your interview to talk about you.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. And that's where I actually sometimes think non-traditional students have a bit of a leg up on traditional students, just because they have some time doing other stuff that, an adult who's 10 or 15 years older as the interviewer is like, oh, so tell me what you did there. For me, past military guy, if you're in the military, if you female or male, I want to know, what did you do? Where did you serve? How was that experience? What was the command structure like? I almost always interview, if you're ever an Eagle Scout, I'm always like, well, tell me, what was your Eagle? It's who are you? The very same thing. I would say absolutely put that kind of stuff on your resume, because that's the kind of thing you're going to have, some, alto church singer on the interview panel. It's like, oh, well, tell me what your favorite, hymn is, and where do you guys sing? And you never actually know. So I think that's wise advice.
Yeah, I kind of wrote down the same things. So for me, what I always ask about are outside interests, previous jobs. Ironically for us, the best people that we've ever hired, both lawyers and non-lawyers, have all waited tables in the past. And we've just found that because of the ability, you have to be able to diffuse a problem, you have to be able to multitask. So that's almost one of our unwritten requirements for any job in our office. But most importantly, kind of like all these guys said, what I do in an interview is try to figure out if I can get along with this person on a long-term basis. So the human side of it to me is more important than what your GPA is or those other things. It should be on there, and I'm going to look at it and say that's really great, and then I'm going to say, oh, you play the guitar, well, so do I. Grab one, let's play something. So the human side of things will, I think, make you stand out for internships and for positions in your future.
I love that. Okay, one more fun one, and then I'm gonna kind of turn it to some people in the chat and see if they have any questions. I know I'm a big movie buff myself. I also love reading books, and I know a lot of that my colleague students do. If you guys had a lawyer book or movie that you highly recommend, or if you have any particular legal heroes in real life that you really look up to, what is that book, movie, or person?
So for me, I absolutely loved the movie On the Basis of Sex, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg is my legal hero. She was a pioneer and she broke so many barriers. And watching that movie and learning all about her life, I just I have so much admiration for what she accomplished.
This is very cliche, but growing up, To Kill a Mockingbird was one of my all-time favorite books. I loved Atticus Finch. Just loved that character, loved everything about that book. And it didn't make me want to go to law school necessarily, but it gave me an appreciation of how necessary this profession is and to fight for the rights of others.
Okay, mine's much more prosaic. There's no set of lines that I love more than Tom Cruise and Jack Nicklaus and A Few Good Men battling it out on cross-examination. I don't know what it is. I've watched that tons and tons of times. It sort of distills to me, they're both kind of hated. You hate, in their own way, but it's the adversarial process about as good in film as I can remember. And so I know it's sad, but that's mine.
Well, I'll take him down a much sadder path and tell you that mine's Goliath, which is an Amazon series with Billy Bob Thornton as the primary lawyer character. But it's just a great, to me, it's one solo individual lawyer versus the world against him. And so that's a lot of times in my world, it feels that way. It's so target defendants are Allstate, one of the biggest companies in the world, Farmers Insurance. So I mean, it's as much comedy as law, but yeah, so it's Goliath for me.
So one other movie I'd just like to mention, if you have any interest in litigation, one of our professors required us to watch 12 Angry Men when I was in law school, and I absolutely loved that movie. If you haven't seen it, two of the things I took away from it, one, I loved seeing kind of how a jury functions and what goes on in a jury room, but also I think you learn that so many people in our country have kind of a herd mentality. They're sheep that need a leader, and how important it is to kind of stand up and disagree and do that in a collegial way. And I think that is such an important skill for an attorney. So 12 Angry Men for me really did it was very impactful for me. So if you haven't seen that movie and you're interested in litigation, I would highly recommend it.
Okay, another dumb plug. Sorry, Jennifer's going here for the top tier stuff. I'm going like down low. You know, Matthew McConaughey and Lincoln Lawyer. If I could practice law out of the back of my car, and like, you know, I love how he just you never know what's going on. He's a total hustler. He's hustling. I'm like, man, I want to be a street lawyer. That'd be so fun. It's a great movie.
But and let's not forget My Cousin Vinny. So
And if you
Well,
haven't
and maybe
listened
you
to the
guys,
first season of Serial, the Serial podcast, listen to the first season of Serial. Adnan Syed, so good.
well, maybe you guys can even test to it. I mean, I hear that My Cousin Vinny has one of the most accurate cross-examination scenes of all time.
Pretty good.
It's all right.
It's yeah, it's pretty good.
Well, I love Goliath too, and as Mark was mentioning, Few Good Men. I mean, Aaron Sorkin is one of the all-time great screenwriters. I want to turn it over to anyone in the chat who does have a question. No pressure. If not, I did have. Oh, one just popped up. Kevin says, "What websites do you use the most and why?"
Does he mean legal or does he mean just websites? Period.
I would assume legal.
Okay.
I hope so.
Westlaw. I use Westlaw way too often, but learn how to use Westlaw. I know you will in your LRW classes, but man, those Boolean functions, they rock my world.
as a health lawyer, I use government websites all the time because so much of health law is administrative law. And the good thing about government websites, all the resources are there and they are free. And unless you're working for a big law firm that can afford to pay for Westlaw or Nexus or Lexis, I'm sorry, it is so important to learn those secondary sources or go to the main source if you can. You know, Arkansas, you can access the Arkansas Code online free of charge. But you really need to be creative in how you make sure that you are being able to access laws and regulations applicable to your practice if you do not have the resources for Westlaw or Lexis, which are amazing and wonderful, but they can be incredibly expensive.
Yeah, I was going to say my first one was the CMS website, which is you know, for Medicare and Medicaid. I use a lot of the Department of Education websites. I actually follow several law firms that put out really good websites, either on employment law or commentary on rules and regulations of the federal government, CMS, DOE, whatever. And then I belong, like Jennifer does, to the American Health Law Association. They tend to put out a lot of good white papers. And since I serve the medical community, I often read a lot of websites from the medicine side of things, whether it's about graduate medical education or trends in health law or health care. I tend to follow a lot of those. In fact, I should be embarrassed to think how much time I spend per day just reading information about, you know, what's trending in the law and what's happening out there.
So for me, probably Court Connect, which is the Arkansas online filing network. You can look up any pleading in any case that essentially that doesn't deal with a juvenile or it's not a sealed case. So that actually probably one of the ones that we use in our office the most. From a research perspective, we use Fastcase in our office. It's free with your Arkansas Bar Association membership. You know, the secondary sources, not all of those are free, but that is kind of a workaround that we found to look up certainly Arkansas law, Eighth Circuit law, you know, local, you know, Oklahoma, Texas, all our surrounding states. But Court Connect is by far by far the most frequented website across our entire system.
And I will say in law school, I did not use the websites that summarized cases. I didn't like relying on those because the point of reading the cases was to learn how to analyze. And if they're analyzing it for you, first of all, I think one of the first ones I looked at, I didn't agree with their analysis. And so it really wasn't all that helpful. So I didn't use those in law school. I don't even remember the names of them, but it's like the Cliff's Notes for the cases that you're going to read. I really didn't use those. I didn't think they were helpful, but I know a lot of people did. I just don't remember which ones they were.
Awesome. We had a few students tonight who are particularly interested in health law who weren't able to make it, but they did send in a few questions. Um, Jennifer in particular, I know has some great experience on this one, but obviously all of y'all are welcome to answer. How much does HIPAA compliance factor into the realm of health law? Is it something that you work with a lot? And if so, does it make it more complicated or easy?
I work with HIPAA every day. When I was practicing and doing private practice, HIPAA is always something to consider. So, and it is huge. And you can be a HIPAA lawyer, and that can be your entire practice. Actually, the first attorney I worked for, the first law firm I worked at when I got out of school, it was right when HIPAA was developing teeth after the HITECH Act was passed, and all of a sudden there were penalties for not complying with HIPAA. And she was kind of the only attorney in the state who really knew HIPAA. And she built an amazing practice out of that because every hospital, every medical practice, they needed education, training, policies. So one of the great things about that, she recognized this incredible opportunity to become a specialist in this new area of law. And I mean, that became her main practice. And you can still be a HIPAA lawyer today. Any healthcare entity needs a privacy officer. If you want to do compliance, there's so many things you have to do with HIPAA, but as Andrea can attest to that, or anybody doing medical malpractice, and Mark knows as well, HIPAA is always one of the issues you have to address with pretty much any healthcare issue that involves use or disclosure of medical records.
Matt, do you want to throw something in there?
Yeah, man. So hey, thank you guys all for doing this. It's really awesome. I'm talking about medical malpractice. I'm also from Fort Smith, and I know at least a couple of doctors who, right, who, they practice in Oklahoma, but for tribal hospitals. And so I didn't know if there were, like, what does that entail? Like, how different is that than just going from like one state to another, or do you guys know, or is there any difference? And just kind of curious about something like that.
There is a difference if you're talking about medical malpractice for the Indian Health Service, because there are different laws that are going to apply. You're not going to be relying on Arkansas medical malpractice law the same way if you have a malpractice claim with the VA. So they have a unique law that's going to apply to those situations, so that you would need to become familiar with. I'm not very familiar with Indian Health Services law. I do deal with VA issues a lot, and that's governed by the Federal Tort Claims Act. So it is a different set of laws you'll have to deal with. But you're still going to have issues with regard to standard of care and the tort elements, duty, breach, causation, and damages.
So I would comment quickly on the Indian health system. I don't know precisely what it is, but I can tell you casino injuries have a very, very short statute of limitations. So I would not be surprised if that's not the same for the medical malpractice world on the tribal hospitals. I think working in Arkansas, working over there, I don't know that really makes much difference for those providers. I mean, if they're doing double duty, locums work here in Fort Smith or wherever, and then going to Tallahassee to the hospital, then they probably have two sets of different legal worlds that they're living in.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Is depending on where the case is filed, whether it's filed in Fort Smith or in Oklahoma in the tribal courts. If you want to get barred in Oklahoma, I mean, if that's what you're asking, if you should get barred in both, I don't know that it matters. It depends on where the plaintiff files their case. And if the plaintiff is filing their medical malpractice suit against the doctor, in Arkansas, you have to file where the injury occurred. So if it was at a Fort Smith hospital, they would have to file in Crawford or Sebastian County, depending on where the hospital is located. Whereas if they were getting treated in Oklahoma, that's where they would file. And so you can't control that. And also with medical malpractice, you don't really get to control if you're hired to defend the doctors. It's really their insurance that will control who they hire. And you have to get on their panel. So it's complicated. It depends. The famous law school answer, it depends.
And I've got one more fun one that someone sent in. She said, I'm a public policy nut. How have your jobs changed since the 21st Century Cures Act, especially when it comes to info blocking? And do you ever have to advise your clients on that?
I don't know that my job has changed since the Information Blocking Act and the 21st Century Cures. It's just a great example of how, and there are lots of different industries that this is true for, but health law is one where you have to stay abreast of new laws and regulations constantly. And Mark can talk more about this because he experiences this on a daily basis as well. But we're always, sometimes it feels like you're bombarded with new laws, regulations, interpretory guidelines that you have to know about and be able to talk with your client about, because you're going to have to change policies, processes, procedures, do risk analyses. So for information blocking rules, there was a whole host of things we had to do with electronic health records to make sure we're compliant. And that's an ongoing thing afterwards. So my job has not changed in any respect, other than it's just another example of something you have to learn about and become an expert on, so you can make sure your client is compliant with all of those rules and regulations.
All right, wonderful. If no one else has any more questions, oh, Kevin did ask any tips on taking the bar in a few years, other than save up a ton of money, I'm assuming.
Exercise. I'm going to come back to Jared's and you know what? You cannot, you can't. I'm a moderate man. I'm a very moderate man, except for my gym membership usage. Get a gym membership and abuse it. Abuse your tennis shoes, your swimsuits, your dumbbells. I'm telling you, man, it is a rough, rough world out there in the practice of law. It's not that it's not fun, but it takes a lot of your mind, and it can take its toll. And so, Kevin, again, the example is, so first of all, you can't study for 16 hours a day. That's just nuts, right? So crack it up into 2-hour chunks, then go for a jog, and then come back and do 2 more hours, and then go to the weight room, and then go do 2 hours and go for a swim, and, wear your body out one piece at a time. That's my advice.
Agreed, 100%. And also, I think of Finding Nemo, like find your exit buddy, find your bar exam study buddy. That is what kept me most sane in studying, especially because I took the bar in 2021. And so we were still very isolated with COVID, and it was all virtual. I don't know if they've gone back to in-person bar prep, but mine was entirely online. And you watch 8 hours of videos online a day, and your brain just feels like mush. And you're like, I learned nothing. I'm an idiot. You start this negative self-talk, and you need your bar exam buddy to go on a walk with. Mine was Nate Arrington. Nate and I went on walks every day, just about. And when you start getting down, you're like, man, I got scored a 3 on an essay that I thought I did really well. He was like, dude, I scored a 2 and I know I did well. So you need someone to kind of pick you up and say, this sucks. We're just putting our head down and getting through it. My other big tip with I think the bar exam is absolutely the worst thing in the world, and it really has no bearing on your intelligence. And so another thing is it is okay to fail. Do not think that passing or failing a test is any measure of your intelligence or your worth or your ability to practice in this profession, because all it is a barrier to entry. That's all it is. It's a necessary evil. It's a barrier to entry, and don't let it warp your mind into thinking that you are somehow not meant to be a lawyer. Just stay very positive and know that it will end. But if you fail, it's okay. Take it again. Michelle Obama failed the bar exam. Just take it again. It'll be okay.
I'll just echo Mark's. So when I took the bar 2005, it was 3 days then. But in all of the prep, all of our prep was live. But I had a buddy that we went to the gym every morning at 5. We went to the bar class all day, went back to the gym at 5 p.m. And it was not only just, preparation when you went in the morning, but then the ability to unwind in the afternoon. So it can be all consuming if you let it, and you can't let it because, in my opinion, it doesn't absorb well if you do it that way. So that would be my tip. And I think you just about have to take one of the classes. I don't know what other they are now, Barbary or those others, but yeah, I think those are actually very beneficial in how to pass the bar, or at least it was for me. I think just relying upon the education to help you pass the bar would be pretty difficult. So you just about have to take one of those classes.
Mark and Jared, is it a good assumption to say that a home gym is a good investment to make as a lawyer?
So I would actually argue against it, because I think the social aspect of going to the gym is necessary as well. Mark may feel differently, but this is a very isolating business that we're in and that you guys are going in. And you have to remember that, like in the private practice, most of the time when you see somebody, it's on the worst day of their life. The worst thing that's ever happened to them has just happened. So, I'm actually in our gym now. I'm with a treadmill right beside me that I've never walked on. But, if I walked on this treadmill and looked at this gray wall, I think I would spin even further into psychosis. So getting out, and seeing other people and realizing that just because your client, the 10 people you met that day just had the worst day of their life, not everybody did. It is also part of, having a life outside of just your practice and your work.
Thing that I would add, and I know we're getting close to being finished. I just watched this amazing TED Talk a couple weeks ago by Sean Aker. He's a Harvard psychologist, and he was talking about how a positive outlook can change your life. And having a positive outlook shows that you do 20%, you think better and you analyze things better, at least 20% better when you have a positive outlook versus a negative outlook. And doing exercise and maintaining relationships with friends and not worrying so much if I fail this bar exam, it's the end, and it's over, I'm done. Maintaining a positive outlook, you're going to be happier, you're going to do better on your exams, you're going to have an overall better career as an attorney. So find ways in your day-to-day life, things that you're grateful for, little things that to maintain positivity are going to be so important, not just in your legal career, but in your life altogether. And if you're interested in the TED Talk, look up Sean Aker. It's Achor. It's an amazing TED Talk. I would recommend it to anyone. But that's what I would recommend for passing the bar exam. Think positive about it.
I'll put a different plug in. I'm about 20 months away from retiring. I'll be 63 here in a very short period of time. I got tons of friends who are better lawyers, smarter lawyers, and they are some of the most miserable and unhappy people I know. They are serial divorcees, drug addicts, alcohol abusers. Their kids don't know them, and they're great lawyers. And that's the only thing that they've ever done is been a great lawyer. And so I would give you this particular exercise to try sometime in the near future. Write your obituary because 10 out of 10 people die. Nobody gets out of here alive. Okay. And if on that obituary, yours says, I was the greatest lawyer, period, and it doesn't have things like wife, spouse, family, friends, civic organizations, some other fun things, I would say that, that's not a very fulfilling life. But that's coming from me, somebody else. But I think that's a very powerful exercise to focus the mind. And it's a good exercise to do as a 1L because, it's like surely you're not going to law school. The only thing you want to do is be a lawyer for the rest of your life. Surely it is an ends to a mean to have a fulfilling life with some intellectual stimulation. For me, I didn't have to then process chickens at the Dardanelle chicken processing plant. So it seemed like a good deal to me.
Yeah, I think that's incredible advice that we could probably, even if we don't go in a legal sphere, I think anybody could use that and glean a lot from it. If nobody else has any questions, we will let y'all go. Jared, Mark, Andrea, Jennifer, thank you all so, so much for giving us your time and insight. We really appreciate it. And I'm sure that you'll be hearing from a few students who send thank yous, whether they're in now or they're listening to it later. So, again, thank you all so much. We truly appreciate your time.
Thank you all.
Thank
Appreciate
you
it.
guys.
Thank you.
Thank y'all.
Thanks, everyone.